Hello and welcome everyone to Scum Villain's Self-Saving System. Been a while since we've read this one. Thanks for joining us, Robin, Delvin, Jeff. Hello, hello. Let's see, we read this story like a week, 2 weeks ago. The holidays thrown off everything in my head. But we were on chapter 31. A lot has happened. Back a few chapters ago, the culminating action of the story led to our hero, Shen Qingqiu, being separated from his beloved disciple, who fell into the abyss and has been betrayed. Essentially, the plot forced him to betray his disciple, so now he's very sad. He misses his disciple, but he's making plans to ensure that in the future, when they meet up again, he will not be at a disadvantage. He and his new best friend, Shen Qingqiu, who happens to also be a transmigrator, went on a quest to try and find some mystery ingredient. We don't know what they're doing with it yet, but they went on a quest, they fought a snake man, they got the ingredient, now they're back. And we are continuing with the story where they are still just living their daily lives, and Binghe is no longer around. And that's where we are with Chapter 31, The Mystery of the Plague City. 3 years went by in the blink of an eye. During these 3 years, other than sometimes asking Luo Binghe for assistance in clearing his meridians and treating his poison, requesting Mu Qingfang to prescribe him some medicine, and going to Qingjing Peak briefly to arrange training for disciples, Shen Qingqiu spent most of his time wandering outside. He passed his days leisurely until an urgent notice from Chen Yuan came in, suddenly summoning him back to Kangchong Mountain. Considering that even the Peak Lord's shadow hadn't been seen in such a long time, this time when he returned to the mountain, the Qingjing Peak disciples had long gathered at the mountain gates to welcome him. As soon as they saw Shen Qingqiu climb up the mountain steps, very slowly they all flocked towards him. The one leading them, Mingfan, had already become a lanky young man. Though you couldn't say he was extraordinarily handsome, his features could be considered neat. Anyhow, not unfortunate looking like he'd been in his youth, with a petty cannon fodder's face that was obvious at a single glance. Ning Ying Ying, even more so, had become a lovely young lady with a splendid figure. Upon seeing Shen Qingqiu, she rushed over and grabbed his arm, pulling him up the heaven-ascending stairs. Hello, folks. Hello, Charlotte and Lobsel. Welcome. Oh, and hello from teacher Shen Qingqiu. I can't set him on the back of the chair anymore, because he'll just fall over. While a sweet-smelling maiden pulling him towards herself was indeed a wonderful thing, Shen Qingqiu unfortunately couldn't enjoy it, especially because Ning Ying Ying had developed nicely and was no longer the dainty and delicate little girl of the past. Sometimes her chest would accidentally brushed him until Shen Qingqiu, face still expressionless, was streaming with cold sweat, having once again thought of those 2 long chains of posts in the Proud Immortal Demon Way's comment section demanding for Shen Qingqiu to be castrated. Remember that he, in the real world, the fans did not like his character for being pervy towards his students. So now that his students all grown up and good looking, he's like, no, I can't be a pervert. Playing cute, Ning Ying Ying said, Shizun, you're always away from the mountain. Your disciples miss you so much. Shen Qingqiu affectionately said, this master has also missed you all. Something's wrong. Shouldn't the one you miss be Luo Binghe? Why are you thinking about a scum villain? And as one of Luo Binghe's wives, weren't you originally supposed to suffer 5 continuous years of sleepless nights and no appetite, emaciated and brokenhearted? Why does it look like you've become plumper instead? The disciples escorted Shen Qingqiu to Chongding Peak. In Chongding Peak's main hall, the 12 Peak Lords had already all sat down. Behind each one stood 1 or 2 of that Peak Lord's trusted disciples, with the exception of Luo Binghe. Traditionally, hands-off education was Baizan Peak's way. Everyone trained on their own, other than the Peak Lord occasionally popping up to beat up a couple of disciples. They generally wouldn't teach anything else. This would continue until a disciple could fight their master off, and then the Peak Lord's seat could be handed over. So, of course, he didn't have any trusted disciples. Shen Qingqiu greeted each one and sat down in the second seat, Qingjing Peak's spot, with Ming Fan and Ning Yingying standing behind him. In front of him was Shan Shu Peak's Qi Qingqi and Liu Mingyan. Yue Qingyuan had yet to announce the start of the meeting, so Shen Qingqiu opened and shut the folding fan in his hand, playing with it, while looking around at all the Peak Lords and their disciples. He thought, if Luo Binghe was still here, no one else would be standing behind him. It was no mystery who the most outstanding disciple of Kangshong Mountain Sect's next generation was. His thoughts were still running wild when Yue Qingyuan spoke. Clearly I'm out of practice. Does everyone know where Jinlan City is? Shang Qinghua said, I've heard a little about it. It's located in the Central Plains where the two great rivers, Luo and Heng, meet. The city values trade. It's said to be greatly prosperous. Yue Qingyuan nodded and said, correct. Jinlan City is accessible from all sides by both land and water, so merchants from all over have always gathered there. But 2 months ago, Jinlan City shut its gates. Not only are the gates unusable, even letters cannot go through. A healthy, thriving trade city suddenly shutting its gates was like a financial center suddenly breaking off relations with other locations. It was illogical. There had to be more to it. Shen Qingqiu lifted the teacup by his hand and blew at the tea leaves on the surface, then said, nearest to Jinlan City is Xiaohua Temple. My impression was that their relationship was very close. If something did happen, the masters at the temple should have realized something was wrong. Yue Qingyuan said, correct. 20 days ago, a merchant from Jinlan City escaped the city via canal and rushed to Xiaohua Temple to cry for help. To use the word escaped, it looked like the situation was incredibly serious. The entire hall was solemn. That middle-aged man was the owner of Jinlan City's first weapons shop, and over the years had gone to Xiaohua Temple to pray and burn incense, so quite a few of the temple monks knew him. At the time, he was swathed completely in black cloth, with only half his face exposed. He was already completely exhausted by the time he arrived at Xiaohua Temple, and collapsed on the mountain steps, repeatedly saying there was a terrifying plague within the city. The monks guarding the mountain immediately carried him into the main hall and reported to the one in charge, and by the time they rushed out with several other masters, it was already too late. Liu Qingge asked, he died. Yue Qingyuan replied, the merchant had already decayed into a skeleton. He'd just said he'd exhausted himself escaping to the temple. How could he have decayed into a skeleton in the blink of an eye? Shen Qingqiu muttered to himself, Shishong just said the merchant was swathed in black cloth from head to toe? Yue Qingyuan said, precisely. During the wait, a monk tried to help him remove the black cloth, but the moment they touched him, he would scream in terrible pain, like his skin and flesh were being ripped off, so they didn't dare pull it by force. The Xiaohua Temple abbots were deeply disturbed, and after discussion, they sent out Master Wu Chen and several Buddhist elders to investigate that very night. As of today, they have yet to return. Compared to Shen Qingqiu and the rest, all the masters of the Wu generation were higher in seniority, so their cultivation wasn't shabby. Shen Qingqiu was a bit flabbergasted. None of them came back? Yue Qingyuan solemnly nodded and said, Huanhua Palace and Tianyi Monastery have also sent 10 disciples with the same result. No one returned. 3 of the 4 major sects had been dragged into the mess, so naturally Kangshong Mountain couldn't passively look on. No wonder he'd used an emergency summon. Indeed, Yue Qingyuan said, with no other choice, our fellow cultivators from the other sects sent Kangshong Mountain an urgent letter pleading for our assistance. That we'll assist them is certain, only this is a serious situation. I'm afraid there might be scattering of other races fanning the flames behind our backs, stirring up havoc. Some will go, but some must also stay behind on watch. to prevent a situation like that time with Xia Hualing, where they had been completely vulnerable. Needless to say, other races could only refer to the demon race. Liu Qingge was the first to say, Baijian Peak, willing to escort Mu Shidi there. Since there was a plague in the city, Qiankao Peak's Mu Qingfan had to go. Shen Qingqiu looked at the two who were going. One responsible for making his medicine, the other responsible for clearing his meridians. Both were going, and neither had a protagonist's halo to protect them. What if they met with an unexpected accident? This was really too worrisome. How could he not watch over them a little? So he hurriedly said, Qingqiu is willing to go. Yue Qingyuan said, My original idea was for you to watch the mountain. Could Shen Qingqiu not know how to deal with him? All he needed to do was pester him endlessly. There's no need for Zhangmen Shishong to think me so fragile. Even if Qingqiu is untalented and knows little about demons, if they are the ones making mischief, I can still be of some benefit. The Walking and Demon Encyclopedia. Whether the original goods or current goods, both could definitely be given this title. And Qingjing Peak accumulated several hundred years' worth of records and ancient books, and each Peak Lord had to finish reading them before they could succeed, all piled at the back of the bamboo house. Yue Qingyuan thought for a while. If he let him go with Liu Qingge and Mu Qingfan, it would actually make it easier to suppress without a cure within his body. If they got into a fight, the Baijian Peak Lord could protect him. Therefore, in the end, everyone was divided into 3 groups. The Liu Shen Mu trio would clear the way as the vanguard and first go to Jinlan City and investigate. The second group would wait outside in case the situation changed. The third would take care of things on Kangshong Mountain. The situation was urgent, so there was no time to leisurely take a carriage or boat. Shen Qingqiu actually disliked flying on his sword, but knew that at this time he needed to follow the main force's pace. The trio flew out on their swords. Before half a day had passed, Shen Qingqiu gazed downward from above, took a deep breath, and yelled to his sect siblings, The Luo and Hang River Junction is right below us. When looking down from a great height, there were indeed 2 rivers meeting each other, like 2 winding, thin, endless silver ribbons, sparkling beneath the sunlight, akin to a haphazard dance of silver scales. One of the 2 was the one where Luo Binghe had been placed in the year he'd been born, left to drift downstream, the Luo River from which his surname had come. The trio chose to descend at a wide and level hilltop. From here they could faintly see the roofs of the far-off Jinlan City, its tightly closed gates, and the raised drawbridge. Shen Qingqiu lowered the hand he'd been shading his eyes with. Why didn't we fly straight into the city? Mu Qingfan explained. In the past, at Jinlan City's governor's request, Xiaohua Temple cast an enormous barrier covering their sky, preventing immortal swords or anything with spiritual or demonic qi from passing through. They'll be forced to veer off course. Shen Qingqiu had personally witnessed Xiaohua Temple setting up a barrier before, the group of barrier masters specifically used by the Immortal Alliance Conference. If they ranked second, no one would dare rank first, so Shen Qingqiu didn't ask further questions. Since they couldn't descend by air and couldn't enter through the gates, there had to be some other means. Indeed, Mu Qingfan, who Yue Qingyuan had briefed in detail about various matters, guided the duo through a forest, and from behind the shade of the trees came the murmur of flowing water. Yes, the word that I am saying is S-E-C-T, sect, but especially when you say it very fast with other words like siblings, sect siblings can sound a little inappropriate. Hey, that's a fun word to say out loud. The sound was coming out of a low cave. Mu Qingfan waved the duo over and said, There's an underground river here. The river leads into the city. Shen Qingqiu understood. The weapons merchants escaped through here. Mu Qingfan nodded. Several merchants who participate in black market dealings meet up or smuggle goods through here. Not many people knew about the route, but the weapons merchants had a good relationship with several of Xiaohua Temple's abbots and disclosed some things to them. The cave entrance was covered in vines and was only as tall as their chests. They had to stoop to enter. After walking for a while, they finally felt the ceiling rise. The sound of flowing water became gurgling. Several shabby, worn-out boats were anchored next to the riverbed. Shen Qingqiu chose a slightly better ship that at least didn't leak, then flicked his fingers. The lamp hanging at the bow flamed with light. After looking left and right, he only found one oar. Shen Qingqiu made a please gesture and said to Liu Qingge, "We'll be going against the current. Rowing into the city will require the person with the best arm strength among us. Please, Shidi." With a dark expression, Liu Qingge took that long, thin boat oar and diligently began to row. With each stroke, the boat leapt forwards incredible distance. The lamp at the bow creaked and swayed jerkily. Shen Qingqiu helped Mu Qingfan sit down and glanced at the glittering water by the boat. He could see even several fish happily swinging their tails as they swam by in passing. The water is so clear. Right after saying this, something much larger drifted in after the swimming fish. Face down in the water was a corpse. Dun dun dun! That is the end of chapter 31. We will be moving on to the next one. I have a new microphone, and I'm still learning how it sounds best, where to place it. Let me know what you think, if this sounds good, or if I need to be closer or farther. I don't have a pop filter yet, but I'm gonna get one. So... onward to chapter 32. Master and Disciple Reunite. Uh-oh. Shen Qingqiu suddenly sat up straight. Fuck, 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 a floating corpse! I just finished saying the water is so clear, and you gift me by drifting over a floating corpse. Do you have to be so heavy-handed in your face-slapping? Liu Qingge used the oar to hook the floating corpse and flip it over. It was actually another skeleton. They hadn't noticed earlier because the entire body and head were swathed in black cloth, and it was floating face down. Shen Qingqiu asked, "Mushidi, do you know if this world has a kind of plague that can make a person instantaneously decay into a skeleton?" Mu Qingfan shook his head. "I've never heard of one." As they were moving against the current, they would be pushed unless they kept advancing. After staying still for so long, the little boat had already moved a distance backwards. Liu Qingge picked up the oar again and after a moment spoke. "There's more ahead." Sure enough, 5 or 6 more floating corpses drifted towards them from up ahead, one after another, all skeletons, swathed in black cloth, just like the first. While Shen Qingqiu was deep in concentration, Liu Qingge suddenly stabbed the long oar into the nearby stone wall. The thin and brittle bamboo oar actually stuck straight into the solid, seamless stone. The boat was stabilized, fixed in place. Shen Qingqiu sensed something was wrong and shot to his feet. "Who is it?" A sound of hurried breathing came from the dark depths before them. The lantern at the prow of the ship faintly illuminated a human silhouette. Then they heard a youth's voice say, "Who are you? What are you doing sneaking around in the underground river?" Shen Qingqiu said, "I want to ask you the same thing." Though he was standing on a broken-down little boat, with his teal robes and black hair, the long sword at his waist, his every movement calm and composed, he still had quite a bit of an immortal's demeanor, and Shen Qingqiu already had become experienced in playing cool. He was quite convincing in faking his own aesthetic. As expected, the youth had not expected someone so pretentious-looking. He froze for a long moment before shouting, "You should leave! No one's allowed into the city!" Liu Qingge humphed. "You? Who can you keep away?" The youth said, "There's a plague in the city. If you don't want to die, get out." Mu Qingfan said gently, "Young man, we are here precisely for that reason." Seeing them refusing to leave, the youth yelled angrily, "Do you not understand human speech? Get out, or else I won't be so polite." Before he'd finished, he attacked with a spear, ferocious like a tiger and quite intimidating. Liu Qingge let out a cold laugh and pulled out the bamboo oar struck in the wall. With a flick of the pole, the other was already sent flying into the water. Shen Qingqiu could hear the youth still yelling and cursing even while flailing about, and asked, "Should we fish him out?" Liu Qingge replied, "He's young and full of energy. No need. Let's go," and continued to row. The three exited the underground river, and the illegal boat drifted back into the darkness along with the current. The exit was at the city's most overgrown pond, and not a single person was around. After the three walked towards the center of the city for a while, a set of footsteps suddenly chased up to them from behind. The beraggled youth charged to them and yelled, flustered and annoyed, "I told you not to enter the city! What use is it coming here? So many people have already come, saying they were going to save us from the plague. Head monks and old Taoists. Whatever, Hua Hua Palace. In the end, none of them are able to leave. You're looking for death." So this young man had ambushed them in the dark in their best interests. Shen Qingqiu said, "Since we have already entered, what do you think we should do?" The youth said, "What else can you do? Follow me and don't run around. I'll take you to the head monk." The three had no objections. None of them were familiar with Jinlan City. Of course, it was best if there was a guide to stop them from taking the long road. Shen Qingqiu looked down and asked, "Young man, what is your name?" The youth puffed up his chest and said, "My name is Yang Yishuan. I'm the son of the owner of Jinzi Weapon Shop." Could it have been that merchant who risked death to report to Zhaohua Temple and seek assistance? Seeing Shen Qingqiu appraise the youth, Liu Qingge asked, "What are you looking at?" Shen Qingqiu replied, "In my eyes, this child can exchange a few blows with you and has a pretty good temperament. Both are hard to find. He's a moldable talent." Liu Qingge replied, "Moldable is useless. I don't take disciples. Too bothersome." After walking into the main part of the city, more and more pedestrians began to appear. But this more was only in comparison to the previous empty streets. At most, there were only 3 or 4 silhouettes per street, all cloaked in black cloth from head to toe, movements hasty, like birds startled by a bow, or fish slipping through a net. The Jinzi Weapon Shop was quite large. On the widest main road, it occupied 4 storefronts in a row, all connected together into one store. It even had an inner courtyard, inner hall, and cellar. Master Wu Chen was in the cellar. He laid on the bed, a blanket covering his lower body, and as soon as he saw Kangchong Mountain Sect's reinforcements, he began to chant Amitabha. Shen Qingqiu said, "Master, the circumstances are urgent. No need to spend too long on other things. What is this plague raging through Jinlan City? Why did you enter but never leave without even a message? And why is everyone wrapped in black cloth?" I'll take a moment to explain some religious background. The monk Wu Chen is a Buddhist. When he sees the new arrivals, he begins to chant Amitabha. Amitabha is a very, very important Buddhist to Buddha. To some, he is the most important. I believe we talked about him in a video a while back. So basically, he saw them coming and he was like, praise be to God, but in the Buddhist sense, chanting Amitabha. Wu Chen forced a smile. The answer to all of Master Shen's questions is in fact one of the same. Saying this, he lifted the blanket covering his lower body. Shen Qingqiu froze. Underneath the blankets was only a pair of thighs. From the knees down, there was nothing. Where there should have been a pair of calves, everything had disappeared. Liu Qingge said coldly, "Who did this?" Wu Chen shook his head. "Not a who." Shen Qingqiu was puzzled. If not a who, then did they disappear on their own? Unexpectedly, Wu Chen nodded his head. This pair of legs really did disappear on their own. His legs were still swathed in black cloth from the knees up. Wu Chen reached out, straining to unwrap them, and Mu Qingfeng hurried to help. Wu Chen said, "This may make everyone feel a bit uncomfortable." The black cloth was unwrapped layer by layer. After what he saw was wrapped inside, Shen Qingqiu's breath paused. "Great Master, you call this a bit uncomfortable?" The place where his thighs used to be had already completely festered, the skin necrotized, a mass of rotten flesh. Even after the black cloth was untied, a terrible stench came in waves. Shen Qingqiu asked, "This is Jinlan City's plague?" Wu Chen replied, "Yes. When this disease first develops, red patches will appear in a small area for 3 to 5 days on the short side, or half a month on the long side, and the red patches will expand and fester. After another month, the rot will advance down to the bones. One must swathe oneself in black cloth and avoid exposure to the elements in order to delay its progression." No wonder everyone in the city had swathed themselves into black mummies. Shen Qingqiu said, "If the disease develops over a month's time, why did Mr. Yang, who went to notify Xiaohua Temple, decay into a skeleton in an instant?" A sorrowful expression appeared on Wu Chen's face. "I am ashamed to say I only later discovered that the infected patients can survive for approximately a month as long as they stay within Jinlan City. But if after they are infected they go a certain distance away from Jinlan City, the disease's progression will accelerate. My two Shidi, after they rashly tried to leave the city and return to the temple, experienced this on the spot." No wonder no one could enter and no one could leave. Liu Qingge said, "What is the origin of the disease? How is it transmitted?" Wu Chen could only sigh. "I am ashamed. With this journey into the city, we squandered many days, and still have not made any progress towards a solution. We do not know its origin nor its method of transmission. We do not even know if it can be transmitted." Mu Qingfang was shocked. "What do you mean?" Shen Qingqiu had a realization. "The weapon seller's son. He has been closely taking care of Master Wu Chen for so long, but he has not a strip of black cloth on him. His skin is still intact and he's quite healthy. If this truly is a plague, yet Master Wu Chen has not infected him, wouldn't it be strange?" Wu Chen said precisely this. "I am surely apologetic to have caused everyone to be trapped here." Shen Qingqiu said, "You only intended to save people from disaster. There is no need for apologies." Seeing Mu Qingfang absorbed in investigating the festered parts of Wu Chen's legs like he could not smell a hint of the stench, he asked, "Mu Shidi, have you made any discoveries? Can you create a medicine to treat it?" Mu Qingfang shook his head. "This does not seem like a plague, but rather like..." He looked at a few of the people around him. "I need to examine more patients before I can make a definite conclusion." Shen Qingqiu exited the cellar and saw the weapon seller's son heading back full of rage, a long sword swung over his shoulder. He laughed and asked, "Young master, what's happening?" Yang Yishuan huffed. "Someone entered the city again. Those people from the something-something Hua are the most useless. They're all rushing to their deaths." Huanhua Palace must have sent aid. Extra victims. Seeing his face puffed up like a steam bun, Shen Qingqiu felt like teasing him a bit. "Young man, your martial skills are quite good. Did you have a teacher?" Yang Yishuan ignored him. Shen Qingqiu continued, "Let me tell you, you should go find that Gege who tossed you into the water today. He's very formidable. Fighting a few rounds with him will be more effective than learning from anyone." Hearing this, Yang Yishuan abandoned Shen Qingqiu and ran. Having found Liu Qingge a frustrating new problem, Shen Qingqiu was in a joyful mood. He walked a few steps and turned a corner. But seeing the scene before him stopped in his path. That's so cute. He's set up a play date for Liu Qingge. He's like, "Hey, listen, that friend of mine's really strong. Go fight him." It's not like he can help in diagnosing a disease anyway. The city was devoid of life. Each door and gate shut tight. There were many who'd always been homeless, having nowhere to go. They could only gather in the street. Before, when carriages and horses had streamed through the streets, people coming and going, they now were afraid to show their faces. But with it so empty, they became fearless. They set up a big iron pot with firewood piled beneath and were boiling a churning pot of water, with some plucking the feathers off a chicken stolen from who knows where. Each person was wrapped in tightly bundled layers of black cloth. But upon seeing Shen Qingqiu, whose aura was entirely incompatible with theirs, they were not a bit shocked, and looked at him with the gaze of someone looking at a corpse. After all these days, they had seen every kind of impressive-looking cultivator sweep into the city and claim they would save them. And were they any use? They died even faster than them. The cook rapped on the iron pot. "Soup's done! Come get your share!" Many of the drifters lying nearby picked at their lice, rolled to their feet, and gathered around, bowls in hand. The plague had disrupted the entire city's daily life, so this spontaneous communal meal could really save some lives. They must discover the origin of the plague soon. Silently setting in this resolution, Shen Qingqiu turned to go, and came to face a person who was walking towards him. They held a walking stick, their figure hunched over, the hand holding the bowl shaking so much it was about to slip, seemingly an old lady. Seeing this, he moved to get out of the way, but the other must have been weak due to age or faint from hunger, and tripped and crashed into Shen Qingqiu. Shen Qingqiu helped her up. The old lady mumbled, apologies, I'm old and confused," then quickly walked past him and away, probably afraid of all the soup being gone. Shen Qingqiu walked another 2 steps and then suddenly stopped. Something was off. The old lady looked like the faintest breeze would knock her over, but when her body crashed into him, why did it feel heavier than that of an adult man's? He whipped his head back around. In the crowd of people jostling for bowls of hot soup, there was no sign of the old lady he'd just seen. There was an opening into an alley to the left. Shen Qingqiu chased after it and just managed to catch a glimpse of a hunchback silhouette flash through the end of the alley. Fuck me, with this speed, it wouldn't lose to a runner doing the 100-meter hurdles. What old lady? He must have been blind. Shen Qingqiu broke into a run and gave chase. Though the old lady was indeed suspicious, could you blame him for not realizing something was strange right away? Right now, in all of Jinlan City, everyone cut the same suspicious figure, walking around hunched over and completely in black. Mid-chase, he suddenly felt an itch on the back of his hand and raised it up to look. This hand really was plagued with misfortunes. It was this hand that had been poked full of holes by that elder Chuan tree, and now it was also this hand that had gotten infected, growing red patches. Come to think of it, it had also been this hand which had first clicked on this stupid novel, Proud Immortal Demon Way. If only he could chop off this hand! Arrgh! With this brief distraction, Shen Qingqiu slowed his step. Suddenly, he felt someone attack with a blast of sword energy from overhead. With a flick of his fan, he prepared to return fire with a blade of wind and yelled, "Who is it?" The person suddenly jumped from a nearby roof to the ground. The two looked at each other, and Shen Qingqiu let slip, "Gong Yi Xiao?" The youth immediately lowered his sword and responded in surprised joy. "Senior Shen." Shen Qingqiu replied, "It's me. Why are you here too?" Remembering that Yang Yishuan said more of Hanhua Palace's people had entered the city through the underground lake, it must have been the party Gong Yi Zhao had come with. He asked, "Hanhua Palace sent you to take an exploratory party into the city?" Hello, Akatsuki. Oh yeah, I had that thought, Jeff, when we started reading this chapter. This is a little real, ain't it? I guess we can all be glad that we aren't having melting flesh. It could always be worse. Let's see. Gong Yi Zhao replied, "Indeed, the junior was ordered to investigate the city, but the leader is not me." Shen Qingqiu thought this curious. Gong Yi Zhao was the favorite disciple of Hanhua Palace's old palace master. Before Luo Binghe had appeared, everyone tacitly agreed he would be the next leader. Even the old palace master's beloved only daughter adored him. Whenever the disciples' generation did anything, he would always be the leader. Other than Luo Binghe, who could stomp him using his protagonist halo, who else could steal his position? But at the moment, there was no time for him to consider. Shen Qingqiu said, "Let's chase together." Gong Yi Zhao gave him a resounding agreement, and the two leapt forward side by side. The hunched back figure flashed into a 3-story building. Even while standing outside, a haze of fragrant powder assailed the nose, and as if it was covered in beautiful decorations, it must have been some sort of brothel. But now there were no joyful noises or laughing conversations, no signs or sounds of prosperity, only a gate, wide open, the main hall dreary and oppressive. Holding their breaths and on full alert, The two stepped over the threshold. The chairs and tables in the main hall were overturned, everything a scattered mess. Shen Qingqiu gave Gong Yizhao a look. Split up and search. You check the private rooms on the left, I'll take the right. He used his fan to push open the nearest door. He could see the indistinct form of a person lying on the bed, and initially raised his guard, but lowered it soon after. It was only a skeleton, wearing a colorful, adorned jacket, its head covered in pearls and jade, lying in a serene position. It was probably one of the women of the establishment who, knowing her time had come, had dressed and groomed herself, wore her best clothes, and gone to meet her death in sleep, to insist on being the most beautiful even in death. Shen Qingqiu sighed in sorrow, backed out of the room, and shut the door. Many rooms in a row all contained the corpses of women in formal dress. It seemed the brothel had practically all been wiped out. As Shen Qingqiu was about to push open the 6th room, he heard the sound of movement and human voices from the 2nd floor. The two flew up the stairs. Shen Qingqiu stole to the front. They were still on the stairs. Suddenly he heard the gentle voice of a youth. "It's no trouble." In an instant, even his breath had stopped. Though it was only 3 words, as soon as he heard the voice, it was as if Shen Qingqiu had immediately been struck by a bolt of lightning. The fan in his hand cracked under the force of his grip. He was frozen on the steps, but he could already see into the private room at the end of the 2nd floor corridor. A group of disciples dressed in Huanhua Palace's uniform colors were crowding around a person in the center. It was a youth, wearing black, shouldering a simple and unadorned longsword, complexion as clear as jade, eyes like 2 deep pools of cold starlight, currently nonchalantly moving towards him. Though he had grown up quite a bit, and his aura was a bit different than before, Shen Qingqiu could never mistake that face. That no matter the angle could be on the cover of a romance novel. At the same time, a familiar voice, which had long been gathering dust, in a Google Translate-like mechanical tone, began to spout out a number of messages in his head, like a barrage of gunfire. "Hello! System activation successful. Universal activation key. Luo Binghe. Self-examination results. Central power source is running normally in good condition. Hibernation mode suspended. Normal operation mode activated. Update download and activation complete." Wait a minute, what the fuck? You actually updated? Thank you for your continued use of our services. Can I get a refund? Oh, that's the end of that chapter. Oof, what a place to stop, huh? Should we read another one? Oh, man. Yes, they have been reunited. Remember, I don't remember if he mentions... Oh, he does. He's about to go into it. Something's changed. This is not how it happened in the original book. They were not reunited this way. So obviously Shen Qingqiu's a little thrown. Chapter 33. Master and Disciple Reunite 2. Shen Qingqiu stared at the young man who was both familiar, yet also seemingly not. His 4 limbs had gone stiff, his throat dry. Wasn't his grand comeback supposed to be after 5 years? Wasn't Luo Binghe currently supposed to be inside an endless hell, carving his way through thorns, studying the blade and wiping out monsters? Why has it moved up 2 years? Why were you so impatient? If you rush your training, there won't be any quality guarantees, Binghe! Shen Qingqiu had the urge to turn around and rush down the stairs. Rush out of Jinlan City, rush out of this goddamn world. But after turning back a step, he was blocked completely by Gong Yizhao, who just had to ask, "Senior Shen, why did you suddenly turn back?" "You really can't read the atmosphere, understand timing, or read faces before speaking at all, young Lord Gong Yi." A seemingly gentle voice came from behind him. "Shizun?" Neck stiff, Shen Qingqiu slowly turned his head. It was only a simple action, but right now to him it felt like his head weighed several thousand pounds. At this moment, and in his eyes, That perfect face of Luo Binghe's was scarier than anything else. The most frightening thing was, the expression on that face now was not icy cold or a poisonous smile, but a kind and gentle one that could cause a person's ribs to collapse with terror. Fuck you, don't act like this, it's terrifying! Aw, thank you, Delvin. Thank you so much for the support. The more tender and soft Luo Binghe's smile was, the more thoroughly his opponent's soul and body would be destroyed. This part was absolutely not a joke. Shen Qingqiu's entire person was stuck at the top of the stairs, unable to ascend or descend, his hair rising all over his back. Luo Binghe slowly walked closer and softly said, "It really is Shizun." His voice was soft and light, but every word that emerged from between his teeth, like the sound of footfall every time he took a step, sent Shen Qingqiu's heart through a high-altitude bungee jump combined with an ice bucket challenge. The guillotine blade was already over his neck. He had no choice but to face it. Shen Qingqiu gathered his composure and steeled himself. His right hand clutched the slats of his fan, the veins bulging faintly, while his left swept up the hem of his teal robes, and he raised his foot and took a step, finally making it onto the second floor. He'd only just started standing there, and he was already about to burst into tears. Back in the year Luo Binghe had participated in the Immortal Alliance conference, their eyes had been level with each other. Now Shen Qingqiu had to slightly lift his head to look him face to face. He'd already taken a huge amount of damage from just force of presence alone. Fortunately, Shen Qingqiu had been playing cool for years and had plenty of experience. No matter how terrified and turbulent he was on the inside, at least his composed and unperturbed expression was baked into his face. After a long while, he painfully squeezed out a line from within his throat. "What exactly is going on here?" Luo Binghe gave a smile, like he had no intention of answering. Unexpectedly, it was the group of Huanhua disciples behind him that flocked forward. Only now did Shen Qingqiu realize the disciples' attitudes were not normal. Am I going to play a game a little later? Yes! Probably not at the normal time, because getting Christmas all cleaned up after the holidays has me behind on things, so I'm going to be working on the podcast. It'll come out tomorrow. But once I'm done, I'm going to stream Blair Witch. No P5R for you, Akatsuki. In the early years, Shen Qingqiu had been someone on the level of a great and revered scholar. His name had swept all over the land, and even when not talking about juniors from other sects, only considering meetings with those from his generation, it was rare for someone to deliberately refuse to show respect. Yet these Huanhua Palace disciples seemed to be full of hostility towards him, their gazes full of ill intentions, some having already drawn their weapons. Adding on how Luo Binghe was standing there completely composed, while a group of perfectly fine youths from a famous righteous sect looked like a group of henchmen ready to rush forward and stake their lives for their boss, or demonic lackeys ready to kill and burn. Don't you have it wrong, young men? Don't be in such a hurry to be someone's bodyguard, okay? Like the person behind you needs your protection. That he's not harming anyone is already pretty good. The person who needs protection is me! Me! Seeing the atmosphere was off, Gong Yizhao inserted himself between them and reprimanded them quietly. Put your swords away. What sort of manners are those? Everyone showed some restraint then. The ones who'd drawn their swords grudgingly resheathed them, but the hostility towards Shen Qingqiu didn't decrease. No wonder. No wonder the one who led the party this time was not Gong Yizhao. If this had been the past and the most highly regarded disciple had spoken, none of these fellows would dare show displeasure. But now Luo Binghe was here, who post-blackening had first-rate brainwashing skills, so everything would definitely revolve around him. Even if 10,000 years passed, no one else could be the leader. But even though Shen Qingqiu felt like he was about to have a concussion, he still couldn't figure out when exactly Luo Binghe infiltrated Huanhua Palace. According to the original work's progression, that should have happened for at least 2 years from now. Both sides stood stiffly for a while when suddenly a graceful young lady dressed in a light yellow outer robe emerged from the sidelines and said while shedding tears, "You still have the mood for this, Liu Shishong. Liu Shishong was harmed by that scoundrel! Can't you think a way to help him first? Only now did Shen Qingqiu notice that in the corner was a humanoid figure, and it was the fake old lady from just before. He looked at Luo Binghe again and saw that the latter's sleeve looked like a portion had been shaved away by sword energy, exposing a small section of his wrist. Luo Binghe's skin was very fair, so the couple of red spots on his wrist were especially stark. He instinctively let it slip a line. "You were infected?" Luo Binghe gave him a glance, then shook his head. "Only a small wound, as long as everyone is safe." With this type of selfless, considerate behavior, for a moment Shen Qingqiu could almost believe that the one before his eyes was still that bleeding, grass-loving little sheep who would huddle beneath his knees. Despite it all, the Huanhua Palace disciples really were good at splashing cold water on him, and said sarcastically, "Isn't this good? I suppose Senior Shen's heart is probably incredibly happy that Luo Shishong was infected by the plague, right?" Shen Qingqiu was starting to seriously wonder exactly when he'd offended the entire Huanhua Palace. Gong Yi Zhao looked at Shen Qingqiu's expression and felt incredibly embarrassed. He turned back and quietly scolded, "You all shut up." As a long-famous senior, he would never sink so low as to squabble with insignificant youths who'd been brainwashed by the male lead. With an indifferent expression, Shen Qingqiu dropped his hand, the sleeve naturally covering up the back of it, which had broken out in red spots after bumping into the fake old lady from before. The disciple who'd spoken had pockmarks covering half his face. After being scolded, he resentfully closed his mouth, his entire face full of dissatisfaction. Shen Yuan then said, "It's all our fault. If it hadn't been for you protecting us, Liu Shishong wouldn't have..." Shen Qingqiu had already roughly surmised what the thing spreading through the city was. He could guarantee it on the youth and frustrations he'd wasted from following the 20 million word plus serialization for years. First, to a mixed lineage heavenly demon like Luo Binghe, this thing was approximately the same as saline water or glucose, completely harmless, and might actually have health benefits instead. Second, if Luo Binghe let others drag him down or was injured for others, no thought was needed. It was definitely planned by him. Don't you know that's the fastest way to foster a righteous image and favorable feelings? Shen Qingqiu couldn't stand to keep watching the atmosphere of heartbroken grief surrounding Huanhua Palace's party. Of course, what he couldn't stand even more was the silent stare-down with Luo Binghe, as if both of them were waiting for each other to speak first. He steeled himself, preparing to do a bit of proper business. Without a sideways glance, he walked up to the fake old lady's corpse and drew Zhu Ya. With several slashes, he shredded the black cloth into pieces, revealing the body inside. As expected. At a glance, the person's appearance was ordinary, and impossible to tell if it was male or female, but that wasn't the point. The terrifying main point was its entire body's skin was scarlet, like the whole thing had been thrown into boiling water and cooked through, yet the carcass was whole and not cooked to mush. Shen Qingqiu said, "A sower." Sowers were a type of profession among demons. To put it mundanely, from Shen Qingqiu's understanding, they were the demon realm's equivalent of farmers, farm owners, or general food distributors. The reason why they were equivalent was because many of the demon realm's creatures, including a portion of the demonic people who tended towards hardcore tastes, all had a peculiar biological need. To say it concretely, they liked to eat rotten things. The more rotten and putrid, the better. Crawling with bugs was even more of an exquisite delicacy and abundantly nutritious. But where could one get so many rotten things? This was the purpose of the sowers. Every non-demonic organism they touched and purposely sewed onto, after a short period of time, would have their bodies start to fester. Once this type of massive communal meal had been popular on noble estates in the demon realm. The estate lord would capture more than 100 living people and, like corralling cattle, would corral them somewhere and put sowers inside. Within several days, once they'd rotted enough, the doors could be opened. You could either let the people out and eat them that way, or walk inside yourself and eat there. This type of unique dining custom was extremely disgusting. But of course, the ancient heavenly demons whose lineage Luo Binghe belonged to were the most elegant of the demons, their bloodline most traditional, and were equivalent to the demon realm's old nobility. Their number of B points couldn't be compared to the average demon commoners, and so they took no part in these types of novelty-seeking tastes. Otherwise, no matter how handsome or rule-breakingly overpowered Luo Binghe was, he feared girls wouldn't be able to overcome the physiological and psychologically taxing challenge of their worldviews that this bizarre setting was. Don't think about it. How suffocating would kissing him feel? Ugh! Since this kind of profession was grossly anti-human, it incited the overflowing rage of many human cultivators, and they launched a campaign to eradicate the sowers, to the point that quite a few nameless heroes risked infection and perished with them. After less than 10 years, the sowers had gone almost completely extinct, becoming rare even within the demon realm, so it was normal for young disciples and ordinary cultivators to have never heard of them. When idle with nothing to do, Shen Qingqiu would take Qin Jing Peak's aged, disarrayed texts and read them as supernatural novels, so he understood well. Unfortunately, this conclusion he'd come to all by himself and was contributing went unappreciated. Shen Yuan politely said, "So Senior also knew about the demonic abominations that are showers. Luo Shishong had long guessed their identity." Excuse me. Luo Shishong had long guessed their identity. Just now he told us about them in detail. After speaking, together with all the Huanhua disciples around them, she directed an adoring, longing gaze at Luo Binghe, as if his face was emitting thousands of rays of golden light. "It's here! Could this be the legendary? No matter what the male lead says, everyone else would feel their own IQ and knowledge being crushed by the words. Protagonist's halo of wisdom." Luo Binghe looked toward Shen Qingqiu and smiled. "Everything I know was taught by Shizun." The most terrifying thing was, Shen Qingqiu really felt his face did carry a soft glow. Shen Qingqiu really did not want to waste time remaining in this eerie atmosphere. Since Huanhua Palace had killed the sower, naturally the right to deal with the corpse was theirs. Shen Qingqiu said, "If that's the case, may we borrow the corpse to take a look? It's possible Mushiri may discover something and can develop a medicine that will cure the epidemic as quickly as possible." Luo Binghe nodded and said, "Everything will be as Shizun says. Afterwards, this disciple will deliver the corpse." That one call of Shizun made all of Shen Qingqiu's hair stand on end. He finally could deeply understand how the people in the original work felt when facing this dagger-concealing smile of Luo Binghe's. He pulled himself away and flicked aside his sleeves, then left without a second word. After exiting the abandoned building, Shen Qingqiu was still in a state of devastated psychological shock. His head swam as he walked, his steps unsteady. Gong Yizhao chased after him, and seeing Shen Qingqiu's face was pale, his expression distracted, nervously said, "Senior Shen, I greatly apologize. In truth, I'd always known about Luo Shishong being in Huanhua Palace, but our master ordered us to keep it a strict secret and not let outsiders know. Violators would be expelled from Huanhua Palace, so I couldn't inform you of the situation." Shen Qingqiu grabbed him. "I have only one question for you. When and how did Luo Binghe end up in your Huanhua Palace?" Gong Yizhao said, "It was Qin Shimei. Last year, she rescued a badly injured, unconscious Luo Shishong on the banks of the Luo River." Last year? In only one short year, he'd kicked Gong Yizhao from his position as most trusted disciple. It looked like not only had Luo Binghe's annexation of Huanhua Palace moved earlier, his efficiency had risen. And also, Gong Yizhao really was cannon fodder, indeed meant to be kicked off various #1 positions by the male lead. Shen Qingqiu said, "Since he'd been rescued by you, why didn't he return to Kangshang Mountain Sect?" Gong Yizhao took careful stock of Shen Qingqiu's expression and cautiously said, "After being rescued and waking up, Liu Shishong never brought up the past, and when he was giving his farewells, he disclosed he wouldn't return to Kangshang Mountain Sect, so he hoped Huanhua Palace would keep his whereabouts a secret. It seemed he intended to wander the world. Our master thinks very highly of Liu Shishong, so he vigorously urged him to stay. They don't call each other master and disciple, but from his treatment of him, he's already no different from a succeeding disciple." So that's how it was. No wonder Huanhua Palace's disciples' attitudes towards him just now had been hostile. This act of Luo Binghe's was the standard. White Lotus who'd been trampled but silently endures act. People would easily surmise if everything was fine, why be unwilling to return? Maybe it's because Kangchong Mountain Sect, especially Shen Qingqiu, had wronged him, so that false news of his death at the Immortal Alliance conference must conceal terrible secrets. Luo Binghe's brainwashing skills weren't only talk. From seeing how everyone just then had neatly and blindly followed him, he knew how Luo Binghe stood within Hua Palace right now. A disciple from Sect A took a trip to Sect B. The entire ranks within Sect B cried and begged for him to stay, and even hid and concealed him so other sects wouldn't know. How unscientific and unreasonable. But with the male lead halo shining down on it, it was absolutely logical. Shen Qingqiu was silent. Gong Yizhao thought he was sad and disappointed. His beloved disciple hadn't died, but preferred to roam around outside instead of returning to see him. Of course this was deeply painful, so he consoled. Senior Shen doesn't need to mind it too much. Perhaps Luo Shishong is just in the midst of a temporary internal conflict he's yet to resolve. Before, he would never leave Huanhua Palace's sphere of influence, yet this time, when he knew that Kangchong Mountain Senior Shen was participating in the rescue efforts, he took the initiative and asked to come here, so perhaps there's some turn for the better. Although my Shidis and Shimeis, on this matter, they've misunderstood something about Senior. I hope you won't take the matter to heart. Shen Qingqiu's heart was as suffocated as a dammed-up river. The positive reputation he'd painstakingly fostered for many years... Frickin' spam calls. The positive reputation he'd painstakingly fostered over many years, sure enough, was nothing compared to Luo Binghe's ability to smear him without second thought. And what a thorough smearing. But on second thought, this couldn't actually be considered smearing, because he hadn't suffered injustice at all. He had indeed kicked him down into the endless abyss. In the end, he couldn't find any reason to justify or exonerate himself. Shen Qingqiu said, "And you? Why don't you misunderstand?" Gong Yizhao was stunned for a short while, then said, "Though I don't know exactly what happened in Judy Gorge back then, I believe Senior is definitely not someone who would murder his own disciple." Be quiet, phone. After he said this, Gong Yizhao flashed back to their meeting in Bailu Forest. Over the things Shen Qingqiu had accidentally let slip and the way he'd affectionately gazed at that monster, Shen Qingqiu thought that, as expected, since we're both cannon fodder fated to fall to the male lead's indestructible body, we can understand and sympathize with each other. Therefore, both parties were moved. While they were busy being pleased within their own minds, the group from Huanhua Palace caught up. Shen Qingqiu accidentally glanced back and saw Luo Binghe looking over. Shen Qingqiu felt in the short, intense time since his reunion with Luo Binghe, his heart had become quite a bit more delicate, and would often feel like a small boat caught in a raging sea storm. For example, right now, though Luo Binghe wasn't standing close to him, and he maintained an appropriate smile on his face, that pair of pitch-black eyes coldly pierced him with incredible force. Seeing this, Shen Qingqiu's heart felt suffocated. "Binghe, what's wrong now? Even two cannon fodder talking and huddling together for warmth a short while offends you?" Upon arriving at the entrance of Jinzi Weapons Shop, he could hear within it was almost loud enough to overturn the roof. This was all thanks to Liu Qingge. He was responsible for hard labor, and after they'd separated, he'd gone to capture experimental subjects for Mu Qingfan. With the people in the city so alarmed, no one was willing to cooperate, and at this point, they didn't have the luxury to be concerned about this, so they could only use martial power to solve the problem. On top of that, Liu Qingge had never been a patient person who enjoyed reasoning with others. His style was very consistent with Baijian Peak's customs. He simply went out and grabbed whoever he saw, and in one pass had grabbed more than 10 burly macho men, tied them by the foraging station. That place had become Mu Qingfang's research lab and experiment station. A group of big, strong men shouting, cursing, crying, and wailing wouldn't lose to that of married women's. Once Shen Qingqiu arrived in the underground storage, he explained to the others the unexpected events just now. For the time being, he didn't bring up that he himself had been infected. Master Wu Chen once again chanted Amitabha. Thanks to our fellow cultivators from Kangshang Mountain, we finally made progress on the situation. Shen Qingqiu said, I'm afraid it's not that simple. The infected cannot infect each other, and it's recorded in Qingjing Peak's ancient texts that the largest number a sower could infect in one go is around 300 people. If it's infecting something as large as this entire city, there definitely cannot be only one sower. Liu Qingge placed his hand on his sword's hilt and stood up. Shen Qingqiu knew he was the type to take action, who would leave without a second word, wanting to go out and find the other sowers right now, and said, Slow down, I still have something else to say. Mu Qingfan asked, Xishang, go ahead? Shen Qingqiu didn't know how to start, and hesitated for a moment before saying, Luo Binghe is back. There was little reaction. In the first place, of the three, Master Wu Chen was from Zhaohua Temple and didn't know who Luo Binghe was. Mu Qingfang rarely cared about things other than medicine and the theory of medication, so only Liu Qingge frowned, stunned, and said, That disciple of yours, didn't he die at the hands of demons during the Immortal Alliance conference? Shen Qingqiu found it was getting harder to explain. He didn't die. He came back alive. He stepped forwards and said, Let's patrol the city first. I'll talk about this in detail when we get back. Mu Qingfan said, That's good. The earlier we take care of the remaining sowers, the fewer horrors the people will suffer. I should also go check on those patients. As soon as he spoke, Shen Qingqiu thought of that brightly shining set of silver surgical tools Mu Qingfang always carried with him, with all kinds of knives and needles. When spread out, they seemed to belong to the scene of a forensic autopsy. There were also hundreds upon thousands of bottles and jars in his infinite storage, with all sorts of labels. The words and descriptions on the labels were just like the taste and effects of contents within, stuff that would cause people to go green upon hearing and strike them with terror. In a moment, the group of macho men by the forging station upstairs would likely really overturn the roof. Shen Qingqiu let out a dry laugh and was about to follow Liu Qingge out of the cellar when suddenly, from out of nowhere, his heartbeat unexpectedly seemed 100 times louder, and his movements also slowed, becoming sluggish. Liu Qingge sensed something was off and immediately asked, What's wrong? Shen Qingqiu didn't answer and tried to summon a spiritual blast with his right hand. A feeble spiritual flow sputtered through it, and not a single spark formed. Fuck me, flaring up at such an important time? Are you screwing around with me? Mu Qingfan said quietly, Without a cure. Liu Qingge pressed down on his pulse, then waited for a moment before resolutely pushing him back down. Sit here and wait. Wait for what? Wait for Luo Binghe to show up at their door? Shen Qingqiu quickly stood up. I'm leaving with you. Liu Qingge never gave others face when speaking. Don't be a hindrance. Master, you are the Bison Peak Lord, capable of holding off thousands alone. How would me flying with you be a hindrance? Mu Qingfan said, Shen Xishang, did you take your medication on time today? Shen Qingqiu truly wanted to scream at the heavens. I haven't given up on therapy! I clearly took my medication on time this month, and had Great Master Liu help circulate my meridians on time too. Exactly why it would randomly flare up, it's basically lightning from the heavens. I'm utterly baffled. At that moment, the system suddenly just had to, of all things, send a notification. Protagonist satisfaction points plus 100. Get lost! With this, are you saying whenever Shen Qingqiu is met with misfortune, the male lead is satisfied? Mu Qingfan then added, Shen Xishang must not force yourself. Liu Xishang is also doing this for your own good. Exerting yourself and moving around during a flare-up is enormously damaging. You stay here and rest. I'll go prepare medicine, wait for Liu Xishang to return, then he'll help clear your meridians. Shen Qingqiu stood up 3 times, but was pushed back down by Liu Qingge every time. And Mu Qingfang's tone was as if he was lecturing an unruly child, so he could only helplessly say, Very well. Liu Shidi, listen to me. The sower's entire body is covered with scarlet skin, and it is highly infectious. If you meet something suspicious that looks similar, don't rashly approach it. Attack from afar. Once you return, you must immediately come to my room. I have something very important to discuss with you. The last sentence was the most important. Shen Qingqiu deliberately enunciated the words with added emphasis. Comradeship is priceless, and fraternal love supreme. 1,000 days are spent training troops for the sake of one moment. Master Liu, you must absolutely shield me! After the Liu Mu pair left the cellar, Wu Chen thought intensely and said, "Immortal Master Shen, don't you think it's strange? The demon realm had been quiet for so long, yet these years there seems to be signs of a comeback. At the last Immortal Alliance conference, many rare demonic creatures appeared in the human realm, and this time Jinlon City's even bigger. Sowers are appearing when they'd been eradicated 100 years ago. This one worries that this most likely isn't a good omen." Shen Qingqiu deeply felt the same way. "Master's apprehensions are exactly why I can't be at ease, and these sowers are clearly a stronger version. I've never known of sowers from 100 years back with this kind of attribute, where the infected cannot exceed a certain distance from them, lest they undergo accelerated decay. And Luo Binghe originally should have stayed in the Endless Abyss for 2 more years, yet he'd broken out early. Could this fucking be a good omen?" After being infected, Master Wu Chen's qi circulation had received heavy damage, and the drain on his energy was enormous. Not long into the discussion, he became tired. Shen Qingqiu helped him lie down, then did his best to quietly leave the cellar. Hiding Wu Chen within the cellar was so he wouldn't be exposed to light or the elements. Shen Qingqiu's room was instead in the weapon shop on the 2nd floor. Liu Qingge had yet to return, and at this time, even if he wanted to sleep, it was impossible. He sat at the table and lost himself in his thoughts. At the moment, he'd think of the little sheep Luo Binghe, who'd always followed him around while calling him Shizun. At another moment, he'd think of the Black Lotus Luo Binghe just now, who drenched him in unease from head to toe until he wanted to rip out all his hair. After an unknown length of time, someone knocked on the door twice, neither light nor heavy. Shen Qingqiu quickly stood up from the table. "Liu Shidi, I've been waiting for you the entire night. Come in, quickly." The room's set of double doors suddenly flew open. Luo Binghe stood at the entrance. Behind him was unbounded darkness. He had his hands tucked behind his back. His lips curved slightly upwards, but his eyes seemed like cold pools 1,000 meters deep. With his eyes squeezed into crescents, he said, "Shizun, hello." Dun, dun, dun! And that's where we gotta stop for today. But what a place to stop! So they've finally been reunited. Circumstances are seemingly different. Things aren't going the way they did in the book, but of course Shen Qingqiu is still terrified that his former beloved apprentice is going to turn on him because of the betrayal he was forced to commit. Will he? Won't he? We'll find out. But for now, we're gonna have to take a break. I will be back later this evening at some point to play some Blair Witch, if you want to join in on that. If you like what I do and want to support it, links are in the description. You can become a member for as little as 99 cents a month. You can join the Discord, follow the social media, all that stuff. Thank you so much to our members here today, like Delvin and Jeff. And let's see, I think that's all that's here today. Thank you so much for your support. You are amazing. Shizun also loves you. Thank you for your support. Shizun says, "You are very good. Please don't kill him like his other students are making him afraid he's going to die. But don't worry, you're not going to die. Binghe loves you." I will be back with this story next Monday. I'm thinking maybe I'm going to move him up to 1 p.m. instead of 2 p.m. We'll see. And then tomorrow is just game stuff and Silent Hill symbolism. So yeah, thanks again, and I'll see you next time. Bye.